to Dave's item.
Okay, welcome everyone. I call the December 15th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting to order. The main purposes of tonight's meeting are an update on the status of the 2021 planning docket, a preliminary review of the 2022 docket, and a study session on expanded parking reductions. Before we move on to the agenda items, I'd like to acknowledge our remote meeting format. As with our previous meetings, the commissioners and staff will be participating via Zoom. During this Zoom meeting, the chat and question functions are not available for use to ensure compliance with the Open Public Meetings Act. We have a public comment agenda item at the beginning of the meeting. This is time for comments on issues not on tonight's agenda. Please limit these comments to 3 minutes. Under Governor Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding open public meetings, this meeting will be held remotely. Public comment will be allowed both in writing and orally. The Imagine Bothell City Notice, city website, and tonight's agenda all provided information to the public for providing comments. People wishing to comment were instructed to notify staff or provide written comments by 3 p.m. today. A video of this meeting will be streamed live, as well as recorded and available for later viewing on the city's YouTube channel. A call-in number was provided on the meeting agenda for members of the public who wish to call in by phone and listen live to the meeting. For our phone-in callers, during staff presentations, staff will make every effort to specify which materials they are referencing so that everyone may follow along. Those who provided advance notice are also able to make comments under the audience comments portion of the meeting. Email was encouraged as well and will be acknowledged. At this point, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the attendance of the commissioners. Commissioner Dodd.
Present.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Here.
Commissioner Curd.
Here.
Commissioner Robson.
Here.
Commissioner Alderks is a little late due to a prior commitment. We expect her to join shortly. And Commissioner Gustafson.
Here.
In addition, Community Development Director Michael Cotterman and Senior Planner Dave Boyd are in attendance. And Dr. Cotterman, you also indicate Mike Stanger of Arch is in attendance?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So lastly, before we begin, I'd like to reiterate some meeting guidelines for all meeting attendees. Please speak clearly and pause frequently. State your name each time before speaking. Mute your microphone when not speaking. If you are also streaming the live video, please turn the sound off as there is a delay. For commissioners, at specific breaks in the presentation, I will be calling on members who wish to speak or ask a question. If you want to speak, please indicate this by holding up the yellow speaker cards in the lower portion of your screen or otherwise getting my attention, and I'll strive to recognize you as soon as possible. I will call on you as I see you, and this will avoid the problem of having two people speak at the same time. Identify yourself before you ask a question, make a motion, second a motion, or participate in debate. And please mute your microphone when not speaking and unmute before speaking. So on to our first item. The first agenda item is public comment. In keeping with Governor Jay Inslee's Proclamation 20-28 regarding public gatherings and open public meetings, the city has accepted visitor comment in writing as well as accepted sign-up sheets for those who wish to speak at tonight's meeting. Written comments submitted to staff no later than 3 p.m. today were forwarded to all commissioners and are part of the record. This time is for items not on tonight's agenda. And we did receive, excuse me, we did receive one written comment, which will be entered into the record. So Director Cotterman, want to let us know if there are others who wish to comment or specifically identify that comment which we received?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you. So the letter you received was forwarded on to you this afternoon from Vivian Peterson. Ms. Peterson is in the attendee room right now, and I'll check and see if she wants to speak now or during the docket discussion, because I think it does relate to one of the items on the docket, but I'm not sure if that was the original intent. So I'm going to ask her to speak. Oops. Oops, Vivian, I'm sorry. Can you unmute?
Unmuted.
Okay.
Okay.
Did you want to
Okay.
speak now, or did you want to speak when we get to the docket?
I'd like to make a statement, and then if I can stay on this screen, I'll go ahead and pay attention to the balance of the meeting, but it depends on what things happen after this. But I'd like to at least get my statement out there as, kind of ahead of your agenda item.
Okay, certainly. So go ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, I'm gonna try and set my timer. Well, I'll try and be quick. Vivian Peterson, 104 219th Place Southeast in Bothell, longtime resident. I know a few of you, Dave and whatnot. I'm familiar with the way the city works, and I wanted to talk about the issue that is happening at my house right now, and that is that my neighbor has planted 4 Leland cypress trees, maybe a foot, maybe slightly less than a foot from my brand new fence. Her yard is, the elevation is above mine by at least a couple of feet. And the nature of those trees grow approximately 4 feet a year. They are very close to my home structure, my deck, and actually hers as well. What I'm proposing, I know you guys are going to be discussing this. I've done some research into other places that have addressed this issue. And it is that certain types of trees that are naturally going to grow to large heights and widths and can cause damage to adjacent properties and foundations and fence structures and things like that. I paid for the fence. It's 100% on my property. That those are not allowed to be planted. And if they are, then at a minimum, they are capped at no more than 1 foot above the maximum fence height, so that it becomes a hedge plant. Or that it has a distance away from the property line to be planted. I've had several incidents of my house now. 2 times my fence has been taken out by my green belt, which is fine. I accept that I moved here. But 2 have also been by branches from falling trees. One neighbor, they're getting it dealt with. We have the tree people come out because it needs to be serviced. And that's the other thing. People neglect this kind of treatment on their trees. And then we have these horrible windstorms. And then I'm paying the price. So I fear her trees are going to do that when they mature and they're not maintained, because she has a tendency not to maintain. So I'd like to see about adding language that would be to have that effect. I also have an arborist, a licensed arborist that's going to provide a letter that I'll be sharing at the next meeting if possible, so that he can further explain what this is capable of doing to my home. I just put a new roof on, and a tree went through my roof last week, the brand new roof that I just put on. So it's kind of a sensitive issue for me right now. I'm not sure what else to say, but one other comment I would say on that is that right now in the way the regulations address fence height, outbuilding size, dimensions, height, and all of that, setbacks from your side yard and all of that, as well as things that also go in the back rear yard or side yard, like the HVAC components that I know when I was on the planning commission, we addressed that, and the sound cannot exceed a certain amount of decibels and things like that. All of those things go towards protecting your neighbor, their quiet enjoyment of their property, and to not, harm them in any way. I know that this is technically, it's private property, it's in the backyard, but there's no reason to differentiate the planting of trees in an irresponsible manner, as it's the same to me as planting a building that could, is too close to a property line. I mean, I could find other comparisons, but those come to my mind. So.
All right. Thank you. We're at 3 minutes if you want to close.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have to say for now.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Peterson. For reference, our first meeting in January will be the 3rd Wednesday. We've canceled the first meeting in January because of the proximity to the holiday. So you might mark your calendar. Director Cotterman, any other public comment?
Yes, Mr. Chair. I have a few other folks in the attendee room. I'm going to unmute them just briefly to see if any of them want to speak now or wait until we get to the docket item. First, I'm going to ask Peter Condyles. I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, Peter. Did you want to speak at this point, or you want to wait until we get to the docket?
I'll wait till we get to the docket.
Okay, thank you. And Dave Drews, same question to you. Do you want to speak now or when we get to the docket? Dave?
Yes.
Did you want to speak now or when we get to the docket?
I guess when we get to the docket.
Okay, thank you. I will bring each of you in at that time. And then the last one I have is Andrea. Andrea, did you want to speak now? I'm assuming this is about the annexation. Did you want to speak? Yours would be now or during the docket as well?
During the docket is fine. I'm just here to be supportive. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you all. So I'm going to back and mute them. And not sure why they're still showing up in the room here. Okay. That's all I had, Mr. Chair. So those all want to speak during the docket discussion.
All right, that sounds good then. So there being no other public comments, we'll move on to our next item, the approval of the minutes. We have before us the minutes of the December 1 meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Commissioner Curd first.
I move to approve the meeting minutes from December 1st.
Is there a second? Commissioner Dodd.
I second the motion.
All right, it has been moved and seconded that we approve the minutes of the December 1st meeting. Any discussion concerning those minutes? Seeing no interest in further discussion, all in favor of approving the minutes of the December 1st meeting, please indicate. I see Commissioner Westerbeck, myself, Commissioner Curd, Commissioner Gustafson, Commissioner Robson, and Commissioner Dodd. So all present approve the minutes. December 1st minutes are approved then. Our next item of business is new business. I have first item is the planning docket review. And Dr. Cotterman, would you like to lead us through that item?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So I will share my screen. Sorry, I'm in the office. I have two screens in the office and I'm not being very coordinated with either one of them. Okay, I'm also trying to keep an eye out for Commissioner Aldrichs. So I may have to pause occasionally just to see. So this evening is the first view of the draft 2022 docket. Is that visible for everyone?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So tonight I want to run through just a quick update on where things are with the 21 docket, what we've achieved so far, and then do an overview of what's in the 22 docket. Then we'll take some public comment and then have some discussions with the Planning Commission regarding any additions or other things that you would like to do. So just to highlight some of the major accomplishments for the 2021 docket, things that were completed this year. The multifamily tax exemption program is in place. The general downtown corridor amendments to increase the height and require affordable housing was accomplished, along with some additional work on micro apartments and definitions and regulations regarding those. Increasing the number of lots in short plats from 4 to 9, excuse me, and also allowing duplexes on corner lots in subdivisions throughout the city. School impact fees, this was passed by the council just last week. So the city, starting January 1st, the city will now be collecting those impact fees on behalf of the school district. Previously, the district collected the fees and then notified the city that they had been paid. So this streamlines the process a little bit for applicants. There are also amendments made to the fees themselves. Multifamily went down, single family went up by relatively minor amounts on an individual unit basis for those. We also made some changes to the code to clarify redevelopment and how we do credits for not just school impact fees, but also for fire and park impact fees as well. We were working quite a bit this past year on buildable lands, getting the reports done that were due to the state back in June, working with both King and Snohomish counties on those, as well as the growth targets. We now have our growth targets from both counties and the countywide planning policies that were adopted by both. Those are still in the process of being adopted, but most of our work is done on that. There's one other item for us that I'll highlight when we get to the 22 docket. And then we just received notice, official notice today that our candidate countywide center designation for downtown was approved. So we will have some additional work to do on that as we go forward, and I'll talk some more about that as well. So some major tasks that are underway and still some heavy lifting to do on these, the TDR and bonus incentive programs in Canyon Park, getting the certification through Puget Sound Regional Council of the sub-area plan. Now that the appeals are out of the way, we can move along with that. Missing middle housing, which you're all very familiar with, that we're working on. That's going to be a major work effort continuing into 22. The parking reductions that you have on the agenda this evening, as well as housekeeping code amendments that you've seen once and will be coming back to you in January. So we'll be wrapping up the 21 amendments and then getting started later in the year on the 22 housekeeping amendments. We never seem to run out of housekeeping amendments. Couple of carryover tasks that we'll be working on in 22, the Canyon Park commercial linkage fees. This is not something that we were able to get started this year. These are two items we were not even started in 21 that we'll continue to work on. And the other is the Shoreline Master Program amendments that the Shorelines Board will be doing, and Dave is going to be staffing that starting in January or February. So those are the two major items that were identified to at least get started in 21 that we were not able to get to, but we will be working on. So a little bit different format than I've done in the past with this. Before we broke it down into things that were required. And if you'll excuse me 1 second, Mr. Chair, I'm actually going to stop my slideshow because I cannot see. I'm going to see if Commissioner Alders is in the waiting room. Unfortunately, I can't see unless I stop my slideshow, and do not see her at this time. So I will resume. So in the past, as I was saying, we categorized the tasks according to those things that were mandatory by the state or federal government. Typically GMA related, but sometimes they were from FEMA, national federal agency, other times from other state agencies. And then we had those things that were council priorities or goals, and then other items that had been identified either by the council, the staff, or the public, or the planning commission. So this time I'm taking a little bit different tack at it. So these really seem to fall into 7 major categories. First being the Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan periodic update that's due in 24. Then continued implementation of the housing strategy, implementation of the Canyon Park sub-area plan, as well as the downtown sub-area plan. Our general category where we do code amendments for the Bothell Municipal Code, the Shoreline Master Program amendments that I mentioned just a minute ago, and then sort of the miscellaneous category, which includes a couple of things that I have not yet included, but I'm going to talk to you about this evening. So as far as the Bothell, Imagine Bothell Comprehensive Plan periodic update, as I've said, this is due in June of 2024. That's the state mandated deadline for counties in the Puget Sound region. So King, Pierce, Snohomish, and now Kitsap has been added to that group. This is going to be a major undertaking. These are the items we've identified so far that we believe will need to be addressed in some fashion in the update. Some of these you're familiar with, like the bike plan, that will need to be integrated once we get that adopted. We have a water system plan that's currently in the works that we'll need to incorporate. The PROS plan was adopted last year or the year before. That will need to get integrated into the comprehensive plan as well. These are all what are considered functional plans that work in conjunction with the comprehensive plan, but they're more detailed, more specific to those particular areas. So in some cases, like with the water system plan, we can adopt them by reference, and there's not as much work involved in integrating those. For other things like the PROS plan, which are a separate element of the comprehensive plan, we have to do a little more work and translate some of those things into either in terms of format or policy, and also address some of the consistency issues for those. The downtown countywide center that I mentioned just a minute ago that we got confirmation of today. Things that we have talked about before, these are activity centers that have been identified in previous plans and previous work by this commission. So the Nike Hill area, looking at some rezones of that, in addition to Brickyard and Red Barn Village, activity areas in the city. So these are some areas that we want to look at in terms of future service from BRT, for example. Brickyard is going to have a stop on the freeway. So that's an area that may have some opportunities for redevelopment or increased density and development capacity. Likewise, Red Barn Village, because of the BRT that will be coming, the green line that will be coming down from Snohomish County through that area. And then Nike Hill, just for those reasons we've talked about in the past for that area, that there's some other potential there. We have several private amendment requests that are detailed in your packet, and I should have mentioned that I'm on page 7 of your packet, starting with the memo and then the list of the other elements. The last column are items that are coming from either the state or from the countywide planning policies from King and Snohomish counties. So the housing element was approved by the legislature in the last session. That's House Bill 1220. That puts a lot of additional requirements on the city in terms of our housing element. So that's going to take some extra effort to make sure that we're addressing everything that's in that. 2 other items that were introduced in the last session but did not pass, but are still alive as far as this next session, the short session that's coming up in a few weeks, that are expected to pass in this session that will be additional requirements for us in terms of our comp plan update, are the climate change and resiliency element, the salmon recovery bill that's been introduced that will put additional requirements on our environmental and land use regulations, as well as the overall social justice and racial equity lens. And that last one comes out of the countywide planning policies, things that we'll be doing and how we'll be approaching the work, and not just in terms of outreach, but also in terms of how we're analyzing the policies existing and going forward. So those are all significant work efforts in and of themselves. As part of this effort next year, we're really going to be gearing up and starting the overall update process. That's going to be starting out by evaluating how we're doing with implementation of the current plan. What have we done? How far have we gotten? Are there things that were not done so that we can identify those? And part of the discussion going forward will be, are those still policies or priorities, or do we need to change those? Likewise, we're going to develop a public engagement plan. And one of the first ways that we'll be engaging the public after we have that plan in place is through a scoping effort to say, what are the other things in addition to what we've already identified that that the public would like to see us address through the comprehensive plan? And obviously the Planning Commission will be a major part of all of this effort because you will be you're going to own this process as we move forward, and you'll be involved in helping the staff formulate the approach. We're using you as a sounding board to make sure that we're addressing everything that we need to, that we're putting the information together that's helping to get that out to the public. In terms of the housing strategy and implementation, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on this because I think you're all familiar with it, but it's the missing middle housing. We have the HOPI grant, the Housing Action Plan Implementation Grant, other code amendments that are in process and that will continue to be in process. Looking at accessory dwelling units a little more comprehensively and what else we can do to help foster more of that type of development. The Canyon Park implementation, the certification I mentioned, the TDR program, that looks like we're going to be moving into phase 2 of that. So you'll get a briefing on phase 1, the analysis that's looked at the feasibility of doing it. And that's come back very positive and encouraging, but there are some changes that we'll have to make in terms of our code to make that a little more attractive and feasible. Downtown plan implementation. We also received the TODI grant, or the Transit Oriented Development Implementation Grant, that provides partial funding for updating the planned action EIS. That allows us to increase the thresholds As you recall, when the plan was adopted back in 2009, it was done as a planned action EIS, which meant we had planned for a certain amount of development capacity so that they didn't have to do individual SEPA review on those projects that were consistent with the plan. But once we hit that capacity, then they either have to do individual SEPA review or we need to increase those thresholds. So this allows us to increase those thresholds to continue encouraging the type of development that we want to see in the downtown. Historic Preservation Code amendment. This is something that will come to the commission as a code amendment. We're also still, first, we're going to work with the Landmark Board and look at ways that we can amend the code to recognize that there are some changes that have already been made to historic buildings in the downtown special review area that may or may not be worthy of preservation. So we've made some changes to the code in the past. We've had an issue come up, and I think we're going to see more of those. And we're trying to put a process in place that allows the Landmark Board to have the say in how that is allowed or not. And then under code amendments, the parking reductions are underway. The housekeeping amendments are underway. The TDR, that some of that will come out of the work that's being done for Canyon Park. We had an issue come up this past year on hobby beekeeping. We do not have regulations for hobby beekeeping, we discovered. We have regulations for agricultural beekeeping, which is not typically what we come across. So that's something we'd like to add because we want to keep the bees. And then we'll have another list of housekeeping amendments in 22. Shoreline Master Program, those are some of the things, and Dave can talk more about that if you want to know more about those. But being consistent with the FEMA amendments that we made last year, as well as some recommendations that came out of the recent stormwater plan, some buffer enhancement incentives that were added to the docket a couple of years ago at the request of the Shorelines Board. And then looking at compensatory mitigation, because right now we address compensatory mitigation differently in our critical areas versus our shoreline area. The most recent update was to the critical areas. So we want to see if we want to bring more consistency to those two. We may not, but that's something that we want to take to the Shorelines Board to discuss. Miscellaneous tasks, and my apologies. The first one, annexation, I had forgotten to add to the list, but we'll put that in there. And that's one of the speakers this evening wants to talk to that. We've been approached by some neighbors that would like to explore annexation to the city of Bothell. So that would be an additional work item for us for next year. Tree protection and gateway design came up with a discussion with council last February when we brought the 21 docket to them. They were added as we'd like to do this, but they did not make the cut as far as the priorities for 21. So those will still be on the docket, and we'll see if those are a higher priority this year. Sign code amendments, I almost want to say those are perennial. We still have not gotten to those, but they still need to be done at some point, as well as the landscape code update, which kind of goes along with the previous speaker that you just heard this evening, and some things that might need to be done there. We actually talked about doing a more comprehensive update as opposed to just some tweaking. And then the other three items you see that are crossed off are ones that are currently on the docket that staff is going to recommend to the council that they be removed. They've been on the docket for 3 or 4 years, and it doesn't appear that those issues are still out there. So we'd like to take them off the docket unless the council feels that they still need to be addressed. So those are the main items. So I'm going to ask you to put on your visionary glasses and get your tennis shoes ready, because you're going to have a lot to do in these next steps, and we really need your vision going forward. So tonight we're really just looking for some comments, questions, additions, some general priorities that you might have as part of your discussion. We'll be bringing this back to you on the 19th of January, making those changes, and we'll also add the hours. You'll notice we didn't put any hours on these yet. We're still working through those. That obviously makes a difference in how much we think we can accomplish in 22. And then we'll provide your feedback to the council. Again, as a reminder, the commission doesn't make a recommendation on this to the council, but we certainly want your feedback, and we'll convey that to the council as well when we go to them on the 8th. And at that point, we'll be asking them for any of their changes and also approval of the docket. So we have our staff work program as well as the planning commission's work program for 22. And at that time, we'll bring back a more detailed work program with dates for the planning commission as well. So with that, I think I'm at questions, and let me again stop sharing and see, I don't see Commissioner Aldrichs yet. So I hope I didn't talk through all that too fast, but certainly happy to answer any questions, or if you want to take the public comment at this time, we do have at least 3 other folks that wanted to speak to 1 or more items on the docket.
Let's take the public comment and see what they have to say, and then we'll have a discussion informed by those comments.
Okay, so first I'm going to bring in Peter. Is it Condyles? Am I even close on that, Peter? My apologies.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, just it froze for a second when I was joining as a panelist, so I didn't hear anything you said.
I'm sorry. I forget that happens to me when I get paneled in at council. I forget that happens.
Oh, no,
So
you
I was asking if I pronounced your last name correctly. Is it Condyles?
It's Condilius, but nobody gets it, so you're fine.
I knew I'd get it wrong. My apologies.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Okay, let me pull up.
So you have 3 minutes, Peter.
Okay. Let me pull up. I wrote a statement just so I can keep my thoughts in order so I don't ramble. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Peter Condilius. I'm with Toyer Strategic Advisors. We represent the applicant for item J4 on the docket, which can be found on page 16 of your packet. This request is related to parking reductions. The preliminary notes indicate that this could be pushed off until 2024. However, there's another item in this work plan on page 18, item 6A, that is city initiated and is also focused on considering parking reductions. This is shown as a work plan item for 2022. We want to express our desire to see both proposals considering parking reductions be reviewed in 2022, as it would be easier and more effective to consider both at the same time. I can take any questions if you have them. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Any commissioner questions, clarifications regarding Mr. Cadilius's comment? Seeing none, thank you.
Okay, let me bring in our next speaker. That would be Dave Drews. So Dave, can you hear us? You just muted, Dave. Can you unmute?
There we go.
There you
Okay.
are.
Okay.
Okay, you have 3 minutes, Dave.
Okay, just wanted to give the Planning Commission a quick update as to what we're seeking. So just to give you a little bit of background, we have a daughter with, she's high functioning special needs, and she's in her 20s. And one of the things that we've noticed in looking around and having other friends in this stage of life is there's not a very good set of opportunities for them as far as living independently or partially independently. And so what we're seeking to do is in downtown Bothell to build an inclusive community for those individuals that have disabilities. And with low income also. So anything else I can add?
Commissioners, any clarifying questions for Mr. Drews? Commissioner Gustafson, and then Commissioner Robson.
Hello, Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Mr. Drews, for coming to speak with us. I think personally, I would love to hear more details about the vision that you have, who you are working with, just anything else to help us understand what's going on and perhaps what kinds of things the Planning Commission, in your view, might be able to weigh in on or help with.
Yes. So my wife and I, our vision is to build an inclusive community that's as large as we can possibly get it. We have acquired 1 acre of land in downtown Bothell, and it is our desire to build as large of a building there as we can for those individuals that have disabilities and low income, which typically those two go hand in hand together. And let me see if my wife has anything to add.
Well, it would also be part of the item that is being discussed by the Planning Commission regarding the parking issue because of the location of our planned proposed development, as well as the tenants that would be living there. It would fall into a category that would have reduced parking. And for us, it's important that it something that is looked at sooner rather than later.
Mr. Chair, I believe Senior Planner Boyd has some information to add.
Yes, I see your hands up, Dave. You want to?
Maybe some locational information too, Dave?
Yes, this is item J6 or 1.J.6 in the docket. So it's on, and it is actually just outside of the downtown sub area, but the proposal is to expand the downtown sub area and the downtown transition affordable housing overlay to include this site, because the logical access to this site, probably the only feasible access to the site, is from 96th and Thorsk. And Mrs. Drews broke up a little bit, but I believe she was indicating that, and we'll touch on this in the parking reductions discussion, there may be some of those amendments that could apply to this site and other sites like this.
Thanks, Dave. Did Commissioner Robson have a question? No. Okay, Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks, Chair. Amanda Dodd here. I just wanted to say I'm really excited to hear about this project. Some of you know I have a brother who is 31 who also is he's on the autism spectrum. He lives with me in my house. He can't live independently, and this project just is something we need in Bothell desperately. So I hope, Mr. and Mrs. Drews, that you'll keep us updated as it goes, whether through emails to staff that they can send us or just, come give comment. I'm really excited to hear how it goes and learn more about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Any other commissioner questions? Commissioner Westerbeck. Oh, see your hand there.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Drews. I'm also excited about this. I've got a daughter who also is on the autism spectrum, and she could probably benefit from this. So fantastic. And I also have a client who has a daughter who she's trying to prepare for when someday she's not around anymore, and the daughter needs to live without her because she's very, very disabled and needs assistance. So this is extremely encouraging to hear, and it's really great that you got to us soon so we can start talking about this. And this is the kind of thing that we're going to need more of in every city, and just really encouraged to hear that you've planned this and you've already got land set aside. So it's a great time for us to be thinking about this. It's desperately needed. So appreciate you brought it to us.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Other commissioner questions or comments? So Director Cotterman, I think you heard some significant interest from the commission about this type of proposal. So how would we be sure that that would be reflected as a commission comment on the docket?
Wouldn't be a meeting if I didn't do that at least once.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I would like to come back to that if we could, because you'll notice in the proposed timing on that, it does say 2024, and I'll explain a little bit more, but it also has a question mark. So that's one of the areas that I wanted to have some additional discussion with the commission about whether you wanted to change the timing on any or all of those particular amendments. And we can discuss that a little bit more, but we do have one other person who would like to speak this evening.
Okay, so we'll bookmark that, and I'm sure one of the commissioners will bring that up at the appropriate time. So Mr. and Mrs. Drews, thank you for that comment. You've stimulated some significant discussion on the commission, and I think you've heard there is some significant support as well. So stay tuned. Do feel free to make public comments at any of our meetings, and we'll hope to hear from you soon. So Director Cotterman, is there one more?
There is one more, Mr. Chair. Andrea Christensen. Who's there? Andrea, you are muted. There you are.
Yep.
And you have 3 minutes.
Great. Hello again. I'm Andrea Christensen. I'm a citizen in unincorporated Bothell, in unincorporated Snohomish County. I am, as the crow flies, there's about 6 houses between me and the Bothell city limits. So my little corner is in Bothell East. I'm actually just south of the Hindu temple, if you're aware of that, where that is on 228th. So this is, the Bothell East area. We just have a handful of neighborhood associations that's interested in getting annexed. Part of our little neighborhood collective is already in Bothell city limits, so we're just like right over the edge. It's about 400 houses in that area. So we're just a small neighborhood group that's really interested in being annexed. We've met with Michael a few times to kind of work through what that process would look like and if his team has capacity, because there's, I'm sure, as you all know, a lot of steps to annexation. So we're just really interested in being part of the city of Bothell formally. We use the goods and services of Bothell quite regularly and would love to be participants as overall be able to volunteer on the planning commission or things like that. So again, about 400 houses. It's a pretty small area. We've talked about several scenarios, larger, smaller, because this area is, there's lots of different ways you could cut it. Selfishly for our little neighborhood, we've kind of mapped it out with Michael and his team on how we might think that might be a plausible little area. So lots of opportunities there, but we'd really like to be in the city. We're so close. So that's what we're interested in. We'd love to partner with you on that. Michael, that's all I have.
All right, thank you, Ms. Christensen. Any commissioner questions, comments? Seeing none, and it sounds like you are following the proper path to pursue your goals. So wish you good luck on that, and stay in touch.
We will.
All right, Director Cotterman, any other public comments? Oops, it's 2.
2 and counting. Unless Mr. Sanger wants to say something, let me ask him real quick. And actually, I'm going to bring Mike in because there may be some things on the docket that he'll want to speak to as well. So Mike, are you with us? Mike?
Coming. Here I am.
There you are. Okay.
Hello, everyone. All I can say is that I agree 100% that there is a significant and growing need for independent housing for that population.
Thank you. So at this time, Mr. Chair, I'll keep an eye out for Commissioner Alderks, but I wanted to go back to the docket.
Right.
See if the commission had any questions for staff in terms of any of the status items for the 21 docket. We can maybe dispense with that fairly quickly if there are any questions about any of those items. I think you're familiar with all or most of those. Okay, shall we go on to the 22 docket then?
Sure, seeing no No commissioners requesting to speak to it. Let's go to 22.
Okay. So as I noted before, we have not put any estimated hours on these yet. Obviously, that could change some of the prioritization and what we think we can realistically get to this year. Plus, we have some items that have carried over into this year. So that eats up some of that available capacity as well. I will say that we probably have a little bit more capacity this year than we did last, because as you recall, we were still down a senior planner when we started the year. Nathan Lamb came on in January and did a great job getting up to speed, but there's still a learning curve there, and it takes some time to get some things going. So he's definitely going at full speed now, and we have 2 full-time senior planners, and we also now have a community engagement specialist that'll be able to work with them in terms of that aspect of the projects that we have going forward. And as I said, that's going to be a big part of what we need to do in 22. So I anticipate a lot of the hours will be allocated to item number 1, particularly items A, B, C, and D, because that's really foundational, particularly B, C, and D. Those are really foundational to the rest of the work that we need to do on the comp plan update.
First, though, let's take a peek.
I'm not sure what that was or where it came from.
Yeah.
Wasn't my stomach talking, I can tell you that. So as far as the item number 1, if there are things, maybe we want to talk about those first. And particularly item J, I know we had several speakers on those items this evening because those are private amendment requests. What I would like to point out for the commission is under J, this is item number 1, the comp plan update. J 1, 2, and 3 are all items that have been carried forward from previous years. So these are private amendment requests that have come in years past, and we deferred because we anticipated the update coming sooner than it ended up being.
So Director Cotterman, you want to bring that up to the screen so we can all see it?
Yes, let me see if I can.
That might help.
Thank you.
Otherwise, we'll individually bring it up. And
that's a good idea. Let me. You know, it's always risky when I share my screen. Just getting there. Okay. So. Wait, are you able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So I'm going to skip down to these private amendment requests. So items 1, 2, and 3 are all from previous years. Those were actually submitted and initiated by the council as part of the docket in 19 and 20. So they've been around. At the time, we were deferring them to the comp plan update because for a couple of reasons. One is we felt it would make more sense to do them all together as part of the overall update. And 2, at that time, we thought the update was going to be happening sooner than it was. So it's already been pushed off a couple of times, and now we're in 24. And originally, I think we were looking at 22 or 23. So we're 2.5 years out. We're about a year out from getting into the details of the analysis that would occur for those individual amendments. So I don't know if how the council feels about starting any of those this year. That's additional time, staff time to do that analysis. And that would then be part of our annual amendments for 22 versus part of the update in 24. So you could do any or all of these. How do you choose which ones? If you only do some of them, how do you choose which ones to prioritize over others? So I'll put that out there for the commission to give some feedback on that.
I see Senior Planner Boyd has raised his hand.
Yes, I just wanted to say that in the past, and I've told this to all of the new plan and code amendment applicants, in the past 3 years, council has chosen to defer all of these code amendments, except for the ones that seem to have a significant opportunity for affordable housing requirements to meet that goal. So that's at least one filter that that has been used in the last couple of years.
Oops, I'm holding for a minute.
I'm seeing Commissioner Westerbeck.
A message flashed, Director Cotterman. Was that anything?
I didn't see the message. I'm not sure.
I thought someone was
might have been on my screen.
Yeah, I'm wondering if Commissioner Aldrich was seeking to join. It looked like.
I will have to stop sharing. Let me check.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay. I do not see her in the attendee room yet.
Okay.
I'm also monitoring that.
Oh, can you see it, Dave?
Yes.
Okay, good. Yeah. So if
All
you
right,
can see
then.
that, just let me know, because unfortunately, when I share my screen, it goes away and I can't figure out how to do both. I'm still
Okay.
working
Well,
on-
sorry for the interruption there.
Nope, that's okay.
Let's pull that back. And then I see Commissioner Westerbeck would like to make a comment.
Yeah, thank you. I liked Senior Planner Boyd's recommendation that we look at affordable housing. I was going to say that's a great lens, as well as what are we going to get the most housing units out of? And so probably just a quick sift of that. I would go on the record saying I think all 7 of these should be done as immediately, as quickly as they could be, because we're just in a dire need to get people housed, whether it's affordable or market rate. In all these areas, or all these ideas are good ones to move that along. We should be making smaller lots viable, or allowing for smaller lots. That's just the future now, especially in areas where we've already got expensive infrastructure in the ground. So anyway, the affordable housing lens, and then just number of units, number of people we're housing. And maybe a third one will be how close it is to transit, bike paths, roads, things like that they can commute and get to shops and services and schools and so forth on. So just some additional information there.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. Other commissioners? All right, cutting back and forth, not seeing any others. So Director Crowderman, do you have a sense for staff time on these?
Unfortunately, at this point, I don't, Mr.
So
Chair.
that will come later in the process.
Yes, that's something I'm going to sit down with Dave and Nathan, and we're going to go over all of these and try to get a better handle. I try to estimate, and historically, I've been consistently underestimating the amount of time it takes to do these things.
Yeah.
Mark of a good manager.
Another lens that I would suggest is achievability. I personally would rather we perhaps take fewer things and get them done than have a big long list and just make slight progress but not finish anything. So I'd look at that as well, achievability.
And certainly for these, if we're trying to do any or all of them in 22, as I said, that'd be part of our annual updates. So we would really need to get those done. It's a little bit of a plus and minus, because that would be less we would have to do as part of the update. But by the same token, that might take away some of the time that we need to do some of the foundational work for the update in 22 as well. So that's part of what we'll be balancing is as far as staff when we're looking at the hours.
Okay. It seems to me that 4 to 7, without knowing the details of them, might have more possibility for affordable units. I don't know what 1 to 3 are specifically, other than making a lot smaller.
Yeah, 1 to 3 were more about rezones to smaller lot sizes.
for single family development?
I don't know that we had specific development requests on those.
Okay.
I think it may have been a little bit more speculative in that regard. And Dave might be able to provide more. I know he's more familiar with 4 through 7 and what those individual requests are about. And you heard about 6 and 4 already.
One could actually include some multifamily. Well, it would include to a denser multifamily zone from our 4,000 to our 2,800, but a modest increase in units. So that's very close to downtown. 2 and 3 are single the proposal was for single family rezones, upzones. And those are both in relative proximity, and we've since heard some other interest in that area. So that may, we can come back to you. One thought is it may be turn into a bigger look at the whole area to the west of the Safeway Center. And then 4 through 7 are associated with larger development potential. 6 and 7 in the downtown sub area on either end of the downtown transition affordable housing overlay. So, and they may have some implications for that entire overlay. We heard from the applicants for the applicant for 4, which is really just a code amendment. And again, we will look into whether that can be wrapped into the parking reductions code amendments that are already underway. And then 5 is another significant proposal to a relatively large area under one ownership east of Bothell Everett Highway and just north of the former country village.
One other thought that just occurred to me as I was going back and trying to remember more about the first 3. In those requests, in looking at those requests, the missing middle amendments that are going to be coming to you next year might actually create the opportunity for additional housing on those without a rezone. That's something that we can go back and ask the applicants about, if that would create those opportunities that they're seeking. I'm assuming they're looking at doing some type of redevelopment or subdivision if they're looking at getting smaller lots in those areas if they're already developed. But in any case, it would allow for some additional infill.
Also, the applicant for one of those, number 2, has since moved out of Bothell, so we'd have to determine whether the current owner of that property is still in favor of moving forward on that one.
So we'll do some more work on these, and when we come back to you in January, we'll also bring a little bit more information, some locational maps to give you an idea of how big of an area these are and where they are relative to other land uses, and some more information as far as workload. But this is helpful guidance, and we'll certainly use those lenses as we explore these.
And did those individuals stay on the meeting? Would this be a time they did indicate the potential for wanting to say a bit more? Would this be appropriate?
I don't know that we had anyone to speak to the first 3. We had someone on number 4 and number 6.
Yes.
And I have to stop sharing.
Yeah, I thought I left it.
Aldrich is in the attendees.
Yep. Just got back to it. So bring in Commissioner Aldrich, and then yes, those 2 speakers are still there. Dave or Peter, if you would like to speak any more on those items, if you would please raise your hand and I can panel you in.
And I would like to recognize that Commissioner Aldrich has joined the meeting. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you for letting me come in so incredibly late. I appreciate it.
We understand you had another commitment earlier, so.
Yeah.
I told him it
Glad
was
to be
because
here.
the community development director talked too long in your orientation session.
You were just so interesting.
I appreciated the support. I'm not seeing hands raised by either Mr. Drews or Mr. Condilas.
Muted. Let's proceed then with the docket discussion.
Okay. Checking to see if, I believe there were some other things that I wanted to highlight. Oh, a couple of things that I did want to highlight for you on, let me go back to sharing my screen. This will be more apparent when we get to discussions about the priorities and the amount of time. So one of the things that I'm trying to do to use as much of our two senior planners' time as possible on these other items is where I can use other resources in the department. And there are two items where that would happen. One is on the Historic Preservation Code amendments for buildings that have been modified. This is item 4B. I'd be working with our historic preservation consultant, Sarah Desimone, on that. So that would free up some time that might otherwise get taken. And then the other is on the hobby beekeeping, because this has been a code compliance issue. I'm hoping to work with our code compliance officer and have her do a lot of the work on that. So again, where I can, I'm trying to borrow from other sources. Fortunately, there are sources that I have some say over. So Dave, were there any that you wanted to highlight and get more specific feedback from the commission?
No, I guess my main focus was on the private planning code amendments. So I think we've covered that.
Okay.
Got some good feedback.
So if there are other items in particular that any of the commissioners want to dive into a little more deeply, if you'd like some more information, or if you want to give us some feedback on what you think some of the priorities need to be. There is one other one I forgot to mention. Nathan talked about last time. You talked a lot about screening for HVAC and other equipment. So that is an item that's in the current housekeeping list for 21 that came to you. And I think that's what generated some of that discussion. That's item 6F11. So to the extent that I think some of that's going to be addressed through the housekeeping this year, I guess it would be helpful for staff to know if you're looking for, what are you looking for beyond that?
So in the feedback we got previously, we were dealing with some minor modifications to the regulations for locating those on side property lines. And we did hear from some commissioners support for allowing even more flexibility, allowing them in front setbacks. And then one of our building plans examiners suggested also looking at our rooftop mechanical screening requirements, that with the justification that modern equipment is much smaller and that it is sometimes it can be a significant issue since it requires adding structures to roofs of buildings and which requires additional review and also potential building envelope penetration issues. So that's another one that we've kind of thrown into the potential docket for 2022.
So I think there was a pretty strong interest from a number of commissioners in streamlining those requirements and facilitating the developer's ability to cost effectively as possible place those units. I don't know if anyone else wants to look back and forth, weigh in on that.
I just saw Commissioner Gustafson have her hand up.
Okay, yes.
Thank you, Director Cotterman. Sarah Gustafson here. I actually had a question on the miscellaneous amendments, so let me know if now would be a good time to bring up those questions.
Seeing no other commissioners wishing to speak on this particular portion, I think you can proceed with that comment or question.
Great, thank you, Chair. Based on the comments we heard from the public, I wanted to see what the tree protection code in the docket might encompass. Would it relate to the issue that the commenter brought up about the Leland cypress? Would that be something different? And then the second question is learning more about annexation and how the maps get drawn for annexation. So those are my two questions.
Okay, in terms of the first question, I haven't looked into all the details of what Ms. Peterson talked about, but I think that probably relates more to the comprehensive update of the landscape regulations, because that would get into the types of trees and the placement of trees in landscaping plans for development or on private property post-development. The tree protection regulations might come into play in some cases if it's, right now we have regulations for trees. What we don't have is a very robust permitting system for the removal of trees. And that was the issue that Deputy Mayor Zorns was raising when she brought this up during the discussion last February for the docket purposes. So I think one or both of those items would get at what the speaker was talking about earlier this evening, if that helps. Okay, and then in terms of annexation, there are guidelines in state law and that we have to justify boundaries that we propose when we do an annexation. So they're not supposed to be irregular, or I forget what the other word is. It's another vague word that's not very well defined in state law. So it's somewhat subjective when it goes to the boundary review board. What we have talked to Ms. Christensen about is, the amount of effort that's involved. So that's one of the conversations we're going to have with the council is how much interest is there? How large of an annexation would there be? And what would be the type of method we would use for that annexation? And what we've spoken with Ms. Christensen about at this point is it would likely be a petition method. The last attempts that the city made were large annexations, and those were both by vote. So they were expensive, they were elections. This is a different type of voting that's allowed under state law. There are a couple of different ways that can be done through the petition method, and I won't go into all the details on that, but suffice to say that's most likely the path that we would recommend for this. And that's then signed by the property owners that in that annexation area. So we would look at how big of an area, what would be the optimum area that we would annex? Do the boundaries make logical sense? Are they incorporating a particular, an entire neighborhood, for example? They're not splitting a street or a neighborhood or a property or something like that. It takes an area that has sort of a common identity and has a logical relationship to the city so that you can access it through city streets. You don't have to go out into the county to get to your neighborhood or provide services there. It's not quite the same amount of work, but it's a lot of work whether you're doing three lots or 300 lots. So we'd obviously want to try to get as large an area as we could that would make sense, that's interested in annexing into the city. You don't want to pull in a lot of area that may not be supportive of it. And as I recall, the vote from last time, what Ms. Christensen indicated in conversations with her is that the neighborhoods, I should say, that she's talking about were favorable in terms of the vote last time.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question, Commissioner Gustafson, but that's that's the general approach.
Okay, thank you, Director Cotterman. And it was really exciting to see somebody out and organizing neighbors around a common goal, and hats off to Ms. Christensen. I am happy to hear that we're looking at the largest area that makes sense. I think one of my concerns is that maybe some people who might want to get annexed could be left out if we're not applying that broad lens. And here I'm going to bring in Commissioner Dodd, because about 2 years ago, at Sustainamania, we asked people from the neighborhoods to draw maps of what they would like to see in Bothell. And one thing that surprised me was people from unincorporated saying that they wanted to be incorporated. So as long as we're casting the widest net that could be supported by revenues or whatever other considerations.
And I might add, there was some very vocal opposition in the last two annexation votes. So I don't know whether things have changed or where they were in the boundaries, but we need to be aware of that as well.
It's true. On both sides. What did the people say? Thank you.
Yes. Okay, any Commissioner Dodd?
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Commissioner Gustafson. I feel like we're about to switch roles here. I love the idea there are people who want to be part of our city, that it calls to them so much that they're working to become part of the city. I think the major concern I have is for everybody in the city of Bothell right now, where we operate at a structural deficit every year. We can't afford what we already spend on services, and we know from large bodies of research that areas such as the ones being referenced don't necessarily bring in the tax revenue that we need to support them with city services. I think it gives me great pause to think that we might sort of bite off more than we can chew when we seem to have already done that as a city. And I would want to pay particular attention to, can we afford to annex, or is there a path we can give these folks who are our neighbors and who want to officially be our neighbors in the city of Bothell, so that we can responsibly annex them, so that we can not only meet our obligations to the people who already live in the city, but also make sure that we're providing new residents with the best possible situations and outcomes. So that would be my very strong and only concern about an annexation like that. So I just wanted to make sure that we were all thinking of that as we think through this. Thank you.
The other commissioner comments? Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. And thanks for the presentation. I recall several times during the last year having mentioned parking management being something that the city should be taking a look at in concert with parking reductions. And I'm wondering if that could be wrapped in as part of some of the analyses that will already be performed, or if they are two completely separate items. And if so, I would ask that perhaps parking management be an unprioritized item that could be forwarded to City Council for their review and prioritization. Thank you.
So a question, if I may, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
Just some additional information, Commissioner Curd. So there is an item on the docket now that's been a carryover, and this is item 4A for downtown sub-area plan implementation. That's parking management plan, but it's specific to the downtown. Are you talking about something broader than that, or is it for the downtown?
In some of the discussions we've had, it's been broader than just downtown. Specifically, the other activity centers and is what I recall from before. I could be mistaken, but yeah, I'm just wondering if narrowing ourselves too closely to just downtown discussion might cut off some important considerations for the rest of the city and potential code changes.
Okay. So what I'm hearing then, and I'd like to hear from other commissioners as well. If that's something you want to add to the list, then we could add that under code amendments or as a separate miscellaneous item, like the other miscellaneous items we have toward the end of the list right now. That would be a broader, looking at parking management citywide.
And I see Commissioner Westerbeck has raised his hand.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. I want to emphatically concur with Chairman Curd. Living downtown, I don't actually feel like there's a big parking problem, like capacity-wise, but there is in that there's not much turnover. Cars are left for days and even sometimes even weeks, and that's not good for downtown businesses. And I know it's been an ongoing issue. I might have brought this up at a previous meeting. Social Grounds 2 or 3 years ago, after they opened, made their own signs to kind of create parking churn in front of their business because the city wasn't doing it. And everyone down here who I live downtown with knows that the signs don't mean anything. So we have all those expensive signs and we don't enforce them. But I think it also just makes the city run more smoothly. And it also goes hand in hand with parking reductions that we're talking about doing that I think inevitably are going to come over time. And that would help people who need parking get it when they need it and clear it out, when they're done. And there'd be less car storage in the streets for people who are just taking advantage of expensive street free parking. And I think expanding it citywide is really a smart idea, even if that's just pilot programs or permits for certain areas around schools or business areas or something where we want that parking to be, used more efficiently. So, and I was on a unrelated note, Commissioner Dodd, I would also emphatically agree with her about the concerns of annexing. I too, being someone who does advocacy work outside of this, love to see people organizing, but I'm very concerned about the liabilities that we do take on when we annex. So maybe if the taxes were analyzed and they had small business areas or something like that that started to level them up and bring their tax receipts up or something, so it was at least a net, not a net loss. We zero out when we take in that section of new city. I could see it more working out better for us better. So thank you.
Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. I don't want to delve into annexation talk too much, but I recall that in the late 2000s, the knots, whatever they're called, the annexation of unincorporated King County portions of the city of Bothell was done through a sort of legislative process rather than through voting of individual blocks. And I'm wondering if there may be, that probably provided some of this financial benefit to annexation, and offsetting some of the costs associated with annexation of large unincorporated portions. And so I'm wondering if Snohomish County could take advantage of a similar process in the next decade or so, or if this is something that would have to be sort of lobbied from a state and legislative agenda. And just as a tack on to that annexation talk, is that there is still a portion of King County. There's a little bit under the 405 on the south bank of the slough that needs to be incorporated. And I'm pretty sure this is just like a minor little thing that needs to be the signature of a planning director or something, but I'm hoping that we can take care of that if we do that in the comp plan update or whatever. I just don't want it to pass us by. Thank you.
Senior Planner Boyd. and then Commissioner Dodd.
I just had a couple of things to add to the annexation discussion. The Snohomish County annexation elections were in the aughts, and that was before the state had approved the interlocal method, interlocal agreement method that we used for the King County Island annexations in 2014. So we could look into that, but it really requires a agreement between all of the parties, including not just the city and the county, but the fire districts, and much of the opposition to the election up in Snohomish County came from the fire districts. So it's worth looking into, but may not be a viable approach. And then on the financial implications of application of annexation, we did do a financial study for that, and the conventional wisdom is that residential areas don't pay for themselves, but the financial study that we commissioned actually indicated that it wasn't a burden. It was a close to a wash, but or maybe even a slight positive. And so we could, if this goes forward, we would certainly dust off those studies and possibly look at updating them.
All right, Commissioner Dodd, then Commissioner Gustafson.
Thanks, Chair. I wanted to speak to parking management. Sorry, I lost it for a second because we went back to annexation and I was like, oh no, it's parking management. Parking management is an interesting thing. I think it would really help us to just understand what the city's strategy around parking management is going to be. I've noticed a lot of businesses with signs like, you know, pick up for this place only or whatever. They're kind of just self-regulating, which is interesting. And then I was recently a participant in the police department community academy that ran for about 2 months. And I was really sort of surprised when we did our unit with the officer in charge of traffic enforcement, that he sort of shared that as a feature, as a niceness of Bothell. We don't enforce parking. We go, you know, the officers will try to go talk to the car owner, say, hey, did you know you're not supposed to leave your car here this long, you know, after about a week of a car being parked. That surprised me just because of how many different public meetings I'm in where people complain about parking. So I really would love to understand what the strategy is from council, but also make sure that sort of all the people that are responsible for enforcement and driving that policy are on the same page, because that felt like a bit of a departure from the other messaging I've heard. And not to call anybody out, it was very fascinating to hear the different perspectives. And I can totally see sort of the Bothell I grew up in 30 years ago in that statement of, well, we don't even enforce them. We just find our neighbors and talk to them. And, you know, that might not necessarily match the parking situation we're in these days with just how many more people live here. So that's just a food for thought on that. Thank you.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Chair, and really great comments by all commissioners. I, in particular, want to respond to some of the very clear and important issues that Commissioner Dodd brought up as regards the financial implications of annexation. If you ask me, financial is always going to come first. However, I do have the concern that when I talk about trying to cast a wide net for annexation, that we want to keep an equity lens on this. My understanding, and I could be mistaken, is that the potential annexation areas are more likely to have immigrant families or Black, Indigenous, and people of color families. And when we draw the lines, who gets left out and who gets brought in is an important issue to be considered along with the financial issue. And then also to Commissioner Dodd's learnings from the parking management issue is just, if it's an informal method of enforcement, who gets the enforcement, especially when it comes to folks who might not have homes and live in their RVs or people who are dealing with tough situations or anything that could be difficult to handle from a discretionary lens. So thank you.
Other commissioner comments? On the parking, I was going to talk about this on the study session on reductions, but I'm going to suggest wherever we look at parking reductions, that there be a parking management strategy, because I'm concerned about pushing vehicles out where there's a private benefit of the public space where people are just taking the on-street parking. So that I think that should be a part of our discussion on the reductions. And I'll try not to go too much into the annexation, but another element of the annexation is the infrastructure. And some of these areas may or may not have the infrastructure which is up to city standards, and then the city may be obligating itself to some financial needs. There was a time when I know at least King County, I was associated with King County government, was helping cities financially with those needs because the counties don't want to provide those municipal services. These counties are, to my knowledge, no longer providing any financial assistance. So that's a change from what happened, 10, 15 years ago. So with that, Dr. Cotterman, do you want to lead us forward on the docket?
I believe Commissioner Aldrich has her hand up.
Oh.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, there you are. The hand is in the background, kind of blending, so I missed it.
Yes, paleness, I get it. So I am coming into the conversation late, so if this has already been said, please, excuse me. But when it comes to parking enforcement, I'd also like to, we're looking at it from a lot of different dimensions. And I think it needs to be, every policy should be looked at it from various lenses and perspectives as you're trying to plan for something that can be equitable moving forward. And so one that I would just like to add to the conversation, unless you guys have already discussed it, is the point about Bothell is not just the little sleepy town where we all know our neighbors anymore. Like, we are still that, and it's wonderful. And we are also a place where people come and visit, and they're visiting us from outside, and they live regionally and they're coming into Bothell. We are definitely trying to increase tourism. We're trying to increase just, be providing a service to our region so that people come and show up and visit us from Kirkland or Monroe or around. And so we're not always going to be able to find the owner of the car, I guess, if they're staying for a week, because we're literally talking about cars that have only been there for a week. But even, when it comes to house guests or people who are staying with friends for a short time, I want to also remember that when it comes to businesses, when it comes to trying to create a place where people want to come and visit and stay for a day or a lifetime, right? We all know that one. That we are acting like a city that wants to see turnover in cars. So I'm just going to add that as a perspective. When it comes to annexation, I think it's been well stated by all the commissioners here tonight. And so thank you, everyone, for bringing that up.
Okay.
Any other commissioner comments, questions? Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. I'm sorry for speaking so much, but one thing that I wanted to touch on too is I'm closely tracking legislative updates on my favorite issue, which is missing middle. And there may be some statewide level things coming down the pipeline, which are both exciting and frightening. But I'm wondering how our agenda around missing middle, which I am excited about, and it's a great discussion that we're having. And I don't want to delay it because it is critical that we do this quickly for housing capacity. But I'm wondering how that's going to interplay with state issues that will be coming down the pipeline as well, and whether we should maybe ask for a prioritization of missing middle and or other housing related code amendments in conjunction with the end of the legislative session. I'm not sure how, I don't want to delay anything, but I also want to make sure that our time isn't wasted because it is so precious. So just a thought. I want to hear what other people have to think about that.
Would you like me to address that?
I think it would be useful, yes.
Okay. So yes, I'm aware of legislation that's, if it hasn't been introduced already, it will be, because I think there was some similar legislation introduced in the last session, and maybe even, well, the previous session before last spring, and there may be even one that's still carrying forward from the 21 session. So we're watching that, and we will keep a close eye on it and see what it does to our missing middle efforts. Missing middle housing is already a priority on the docket because it's a priority of the council, and it's also a carryover from the docket from the strategy that was adopted by the council a couple of years ago. So I don't know that we can make it a higher priority than it already is, since we're already working on it, and we have funding to do more of the work that needs to be done on that as well through the grant. So that's one of Dave's main projects for 22 is getting that done. As far as the state legislation, yes, it may supplant or override what we're doing at the local level. But I think in any case, what comes out of the state legislation, if it doesn't pass, then we're ahead of the game. Two, if it does pass, then we're still ahead of the game because we will have already done a lot of the work that needs to be done. And what we're looking at is pretty consistent with everything that I've seen proposed so far. If anything, it may go a little further than what we're currently talking about. But the council could make a decision at that time to, just extend it to the next step to whatever state legislation is mandating. And I'll just add sort of a professional opinion. I'm always leery when the state legislature writes local zoning code, because more often than not, it creates more headache for us. And it doesn't always accomplish what they want to accomplish because every jurisdiction is a little bit different. But it's a one size fits all approach to what is a very localized situation sometimes. But it certainly gives us some guidance.
And I would think that presuming the legislature does act, that action wouldn't happen until the middle of the year. This is a long session, isn't it?
No, it's a short session.
Short session?
This year's a short session, but it would, anything that passes usually goes into effect in July. And sometimes for something as major as this, and what we're talking about is they would mandate basically allowing up to 4plexes in all single family. So that's the proposal in some form or fashion. There have been a few different versions that have come forward, but that's the gist of it. And typically that goes into effect in July, or because it's a major change like that, they give a deadline. It may be that it has to be done by the time we do our comp plan update, our next update. Often it's tied to that, or they may give us another 12 or 18 months to enact it. But in either case, the work we're doing will put us in very good position. And I'm not too concerned about what the state legislation will do from that standpoint, because I think we'll be able to react to it fairly quickly.
And we would be able to have an impact sooner, which we would then need to modify as appropriate, but we'd be able to get something done rather than wait.
I believe so. Yes, that's my sense right now, just based on the legislation that I've seen proposed. I haven't seen the specifics for this session, but I'm aware of what's come up in the last sessions.
All right. Thank you. Other commissioner comments? All right.
We ready to roll into parking?
Yes, that concludes our discussion of the planning docket. Since we're about an hour and a half in, I'm going to suggest we take a brief break, because parking is such a topic of great interest amongst this group. I suspect we will discuss it for a little bit. So I see 7:35 on my screen here. Let's briefly adjourn for 10 minutes and come back and discuss parking. Do we need, all right. So welcome back. I'm reconvening the December 15th, 2021 meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission at 7:46. And we will move on to our next agenda item, a study session on expanded parking reductions. And Senior Planner Boyd, is that you taking us on this one?
Yes, thank you, Chair and Commissioners. I will share my screen. I've got a PowerPoint that's going to look pretty familiar. We've added some items, and but as you recall, when we took this up on November 17th, we didn't get all the way through the questions that I had to pose to you. So we're going to do that this evening. And we also, based on the discussion that we did have, we felt that it was would be useful to kind of do a little more in terms of setting some context. So we'll also cover that. So the purpose of this code amendment is to expand provisions for reducing parking requirements. And the core of it has to do with extending, or it started with the proposal to extend the provisions for parking reductions for market rate housing to a half mile from the quarter mile that was mandated by the state regulations from frequent transit stops. We also included consideration of additional reductions, potentially as justified by a parking study. And so tonight we wanted to talk a little bit more about the affordable housing provisions and the context for that discussion, and finish the review of the issues from November 17th. And we're certainly open to other options that the planning commissioners may want to provide. So again, the background is that we've had parking revisions for transit-related parking reductions that go back to the 90s. And then since then, we've also added to those some reductions for green buildings. And then in 2020, we adopted state mandated reductions. And as you'll recall, Planning Commission did recommend extending the market rate reductions from a quarter to half mile. But staff recommended and council chose to keep those reductions to a quarter mile so that we could study the potential for affordable housing provisions with that expansion. So that was kind of where this whole thing started. But as we get into it, of course, there are other opportunities and that we do want to at least consider exploring further. So, and I'm going to invite Mike Stanger to chime in during this portion of the presentation. I've incorporated some graphics that he provided for us in terms of the context for affordability. So our comprehensive plan and our housing strategy both state that we should consider affordability provisions whenever we make amendments, plan or code amendments that create increases in capacity, whether that's an increase in height, an increase in density allowances, or a reduction in parking, because parking is often a limiting factor in how many units can be fit on a site, at least when it comes to multifamily development. Our approach to affordable housing with capacity increases has always been to try to balance the benefits of the added value to the property owner or developer and the benefit that the public gets through the affordable housing. And to make sure that the provisions do make it a win-win so that the developer does get some added benefit in exchange for providing the affordable housing. To date, all of our affordable housing requirements apply to projects of 5 or more units, without any strong reason to change that, we would suggest that we stick with that just for consistency's sake. And we have now, in the last few years, and Bothell has come to this relatively late compared to some other jurisdictions. We have 4 areas in downtown and then plus the Canyon Park areas where we've created added capacity and reduced parking and created affordable housing requirements and in one case incentives. So before I move on to the next slide, Mike, is there anything more you would like to say about this graphic?
Thanks, Dave. I don't recall if we ever introduced this or discussed this chart as a conceptual explanation for the approach that we've taken that Dave just described in general. What we're showing here is 3 types of benefits or value added that the city is giving to landowners or developers. The increased capacity in the blue, the reduced parking is depicted in the orange, and the gray for the MFTE program or tax exemption. And the idea, again, is for the public to share in that increased value by having the developer set aside some of the units to be affordable. And that affordability is valued in the difference between market rents and affordable rents. So we want to leave some motivation and benefit to developers and landowners, so we don't try to take all of it. Plus, we recognize there could be or should be some margin for error in case there are some things that we don't account for. But in the case of parking, I would add that there are 2 ways to look at it. One is obviously the raw savings in construction costs, which for structured parking can run upwards of $40,000 a space to closer to 80 if it's underground and depending on your location. There is also in Bothell the potential for that, reducing the structured parking also gives the developer an opportunity to take advantage of even more increased capacity. The analysis that we've done in the past has not, double dipped that, so to speak. We just really, for parking purposes, we've just really focused on the construction cost savings, and so that increases further the developer's margin of benefit in this exchange that we're talking about. Dave?
Thanks.
Dave, before you proceed, I see Commissioner Dodd has raised her hand.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing briefly.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Dave and Mike. I just had a question about that chart. Can you help me understand, if you look at the MFTE part, how are the 2 colors, what determines what's taller? I feel like we're missing an axis there. I'm not.
Could you pull that back up?
Go back. Yeah, there we go.
So I'm not sure. Could you rephrase your question so I make sure I address it
Yeah,
properly?
like just looking at the chart, trying to like, so under MFTE, the gray bar is taller than the yellow bar. What are the benchmarks that we're like? What would be along that, that vertical axis that determines that? I guess I'm missing part of how
Okay.
this is.
Well, the vertical axis, yeah, I avoided putting numbers on there so it would be more conceptual in nature. But in this case, with the MFTE program, the value to the developer is the tax savings over time, and the value to the public again is the value of the affordable units overall over the life of the project. I put it here, depicted it here as being kind of a 2-to-1 ratio here, but sometimes that ratio doesn't have to be 2-to-1 depending on what the city's preference is, and what they think the appetite for the developers is to take on the MFTE program. Am I getting to an answer or still missing what you're curious about?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, though. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Another part of that is that the value, as Mike has described it to me, the value to the developer for voluntary programs like MFTE needs to be greater for them to actually agree to do that. Whereas with mandatory programs, it's less. So that's why the difference between the yellow and the other colored bars is less under the mandatory program than for the MFTE and combined programs. So I just also wanted to, this next slide is again, there was some questions last time about where have we done this and for how long. I'm not sure how readable these are, but in the downtown sub area, we have mandatory requirements along the West Hill edge of downtown, where we have the black cross-hatching in both the downtown transition and SR 522 districts. And then on the other side of 522 and extending along the river in the purple area with the green cross-hatching that may not be very visible here, that's where we have allowed or where we've created a voluntary incentive program that the SAMA project by Imagine Housing is taking advantage of. But it does apply to the rest of that SR 522 district area. And then more recently, and again, I don't know how visible this is to you, but in the general downtown corridor, the white cross-hatching, and I think we're going to make that black cross-hatching to match the other ones, is the new GDC affordable housing overlay, where we allowed an extra floor of height in exchange for affordability requirements. And then in Canyon Park, all of the sort of pinkish, orange and pink zones, all the zones with R's on them have affordability requirements as a result of both the increase in capacity and maybe even more so the reduction in parking in those areas. So we've established these. They're relatively new. We have not had any built yet. The first one the one that's furthest along in permitting is the voluntary incentive for the SAMA project. But this next slide, well, this doesn't actually show a timeline, but it does show some other communities that have both voluntary and in some cases mandatory programs, and what the performance has been in those cities. And I mentioned Redmond last time as the jurisdiction that has created the most units through its mandatory program. But it took some time from the time they implemented that to when it really took off. So market conditions play a big part in this, and so the fact that we haven't got any yet is something that we'll continue to monitor and consider making some tweaks going forward if developers continue not to take advantage of them. But we're using the same kind of analysis that these other communities used in crafting their incentives and mandatory requirements. Anything to add, Mike, before I move on?
No, I think the main point that you're trying to make is that is just that what we're inquiring or the discussion we want to have tonight is a continuation of what the city has already been doing. It's not a new thing, in other words.
Commissioner Gustafson, did I see you raise your hand, and then Director Cotterman?
Sarah Gustafson here. Thank you, Chair. I really enjoy seeing these graphs. It helps us think about them in new ways. I was wondering if the Redmond mandatory MFTE program is so much smaller because it started later, or is there some other reason why the no MFTE is doing so much better than the MFTE in that zone? And any insights on Redmond in general?
You're exactly right. Redmond adopted MFTE in 2017.
Okay.
And so they had the mandatory program that started in the mid 90s.
Okay.
Has been around a lot longer. This only shows the production since 2010, but virtually all the programs, virtually all the new projects that have been built since they instituted the MFTE program have taken advantage of MFTE as well. I think the idea being that if they already have to provide 10% of the units as affordable, then they might as well get the tax exemption, because all they have to do then is lower their affordability a little bit.
Director Cotterman, oh, sorry. Director Cotterman, did you want to weigh in, and then Commissioner Alders?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add one thing for the commission's information and consideration. For the mandatory programs, it's important to keep in mind that we have to put in the mandatory provisions when we create the additional capacity. We can't come back and do it later. Once we give it away, we can't go back and reclaim it. So that needs to be part of the consideration whenever we look at a mandatory program. I just wanted to make the commission aware of that.
But we could have a voluntary program come in later, correct?
Yes, you can do a voluntary program later, but the mandatory has to be done when the capacity is created.
Okay. Thank you. Commissioner Alders?
Chair, Jenny Alders here. My question is for you, Mike. Thank you for this presentation and for helping us make comparisons between other jurisdictions. It's really helpful to be able to, if we're trying to replicate something, know what we're going for, what the possibilities are. And so my question is about Redmond. Since the mandatory MFTE program was implemented more recently, based on the trends of kind of how things have gone since then, although I know that the pandemic is a giant asterisk in basically everything, what's the projected change over the next few years? Is it thought that the mandatory MFTE might catch up to the non-MFTE, or just sort of tell us how it's sort of anticipated to change over time, and where you think the benefit is going to come from with the new changes that have been made.
Specifically in Redmond? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Okay, well, I want to clarify first of all that the MFTE is not mandatory, strictly speaking, right? The zoning code requires affordability, 10% of all the units to be affordable in virtually the whole city. But what I'm doing in the chart here is combining or pairing those projects that have conform to the mandatory zoning requirement and also taken advantage of the MFTE versus those that have not used MFTE. I don't recall off the top of my head since 2017 how many new projects we've taken in we've contracted for, but I want to say that 80 to 90% of them have used the MFTE as along with their mandatory requirements. So with the MFTE in Redmond, you can use the same units that you already have to make affordable. You just reduce the affordability level from 80% to 60% of median, and you get 8 years of a tax exemption for that. The development has not slowed down. I mean, there was a bit of a lull there the first year of the pandemic, but it's picked up again, and we're probably working on half a dozen new multifamily projects there now that probably average between 100 and 400 units total per project. And they're in downtown, they're in Marymore, and in the Overlake area, especially around the light rail station at Overlake. There will be lots of new development and redevelopment there. So I would say, speaking to the chart, that the top bar where it says mandatory and MFTE, that one's going to catch up over time to the one that didn't have the MFTE.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Seeing none. Dave, you want to proceed?
Okay. So the next two slides I'm going to go over fairly quickly because we did discuss them in some detail. The first one was should the code consider proposed future transit? And I noted that the Sound Transit, bus rapid transit lines are coming in 26 and 27 now, I believe. I can never keep those dates straight, but they could consolidate some of the downtown stops that are shown on this map here. So the stops that generally meet the frequent transit service in the state law and that we've adopted are in the orange dots, the small dots, and there's quarter-mile buffers in pink, and then half-mile buffers in that peachy orange color shown here. So this could change to some degree, and also the community transit Swift Green Line. Once we have the capacity on Bothell Everett Highway, or when we have the capacity, they've indicated that they will extend the Swift line to downtown and to the campus. So it's likely that we'll fill in some of that area between Canyon Park and downtown that's within a half mile of frequent transit. And the input we got in November was, I think, a pretty strong yes, that they should be forward-looking. There will probably need to be some criteria for that, which what kind of how certain this future service is, but there definitely seemed to be support for that. Oh, and then sorry. and I just included this, community transit hasn't indicated exactly where the stops will be, but it's likely that there will be a stop around 240th along Bothell Highway. So that's another area that would likely qualify for transit reductions. There was a fair amount of discussion about whether a parking study should be required for further reductions. The current mandatory state requirements, we required for affordable housing that parking study is only needed for reductions below 1 space per bedroom. State code allowed jurisdictions to reduce parking requirement either to 1 space per bedroom or 0.5 spaces per unit. And so we've said you can go down to 1 space per bedroom by right and go down to 0.75 per unit with a parking study. Another question was if we're requiring a parking study, do we should the parking requirement be set by the parking study, or do we need to kind of set some incremental levels in the code? And I think the feedback was that that allow some flexibility for developers by allowing them to provide parking as justified by their parking study. And then I raised the question about a need for third-party review of the parking study. And the main concern that I came away with was about the cost, particularly if we did require an applicant to also pay for a third-party review. And back to the first question, there did seem to be a fair amount of support for kind of a two-phase project to allow some reduction by right without a parking study, and further reductions with the parking study, as we've done, per the precedent that we've set in the state mandated reductions. So to make sure that we get time to cover the other issues that I raised, unless there's a burning need to jump in now, I can always come back to these. There's only 2 or 3 more slides here. I'm going to move on to the topics that we didn't have time to discuss very much. So one is, should we allow further reductions in downtown and Canyon Park? Both of those areas, we've already reduced the parking requirement based on the fact that they do and will have good transit service. But further reductions have been requested, at least in downtown. I'm not sure about Canyon Park, if we've had any requests for further reductions there. And additional reductions in downtown could be leverage for affordable housing, because since the downtown code didn't really, when we implemented the downtown plan, it didn't increase the capacity, the heights anyway. And so we did not take advantage of the reductions in parking then. That was a strategy that sort of came along after that. But this would allow us, if we did allow further reductions as justified by a parking study, and the project that we heard about, the special needs housing, would be a case in point where they may be able to do that without increasing building heights and sticking with the building heights that we've analyzed in the downtown plan.
So let's pause and see if commissioners have questions or comments. Oh, I see Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't want to take up too much time, but on that map, there's a stop on 522 in Woodinville at the first exit closest to Woodinville. And that should be, I'm pretty sure that's an area that has a high capacity or high frequency bus stop currently. And I'm wondering, that looks like it could encapsulate some of within half mile of some moderate density near the Home Depot area. And so I'm wondering if that was included or not included for some reason.
The analysis I did, and I'll go back and double check that, was that there are a number of east-west lines that terminate at the campus, and even Sound Transit's BRT, half of those buses will turn around at the campus or at the 455-522 interchange, and then return, and only half will go on to Woodinville. So I think that I'll double check that, but my recollection was that dropped those below the state mandated levels for frequent transit service.
Thank you. Okay.
Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks. One concern I have, since you brought up the project that the Drews were talking about, and I, being one of the guardians for my brother, like you end up talking to a lot of other parents and guardians of kids and adults in similar situations. And I know a family that kind of looked at that for their son. One of the, the cost of development was one of the big things in trying to make that happen. And I'm wondering if there's, and I'm still forming this as I say it, in case you can't tell, so I'm sorry, but in some of the Canyon Park sub-area plan stuff, there were a few sections where we said, okay, up to, the director to make like an exception on some of this stuff. And I'm wondering if on projects like the Drews project that was mentioned, if we could leave room, not for a parking study, but for a review, whether it's the director or whatever staff is appropriate, to say, okay, looking at this project, we can see that, this is targeting people with, with disabilities who are not driving, mostly, or with low income. Like, can the director just approve less parking on this project, so they don't have to pay for a parking study? I'm wondering if that's feasible on certain projects, sort of, anyway, I think you get my point. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so the procedure in Canyon Park was what we called a departure that had criteria for it. It's possible that the Drews project may fall within the what we've already adopted for very low and extremely low income housing, and or housing for people with disabilities. I'm using that as an example of a kind of project. If it happened to fall outside that quarter mile or a half mile perimeter, should the code provide some flexibility, and we can look into doing that with departures as opposed to parking study.
Thanks. I just was thinking about sort of the overall cost, so I appreciate that.
Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thanks, Chair Kieran and Mr. Boyd, Mr. Conran. I have several comments, but I want to wait till we were done with the slide. So I just want to check in and see if this is a good time to make several comments, or if I should wait till the presentation's over.
It would probably be helpful if you commented on the immediately preceding slide, and then
these are kind of zoomed out, higher level comments. So maybe I'll just wait, and because they kind of skip around, but they all relate to the overall policies.
Okay, up to you.
I'll just wait till the slides are done. How's that?
Okay, shall I go ahead?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think there may just be one more. Oh, so one of the private code amendments in the docket was for a rezone and parking reduction, and it's just outside the half-mile buffer from Canyon Park the current Canyon Park Swift Terminal, it would probably be within half or quarter mile of a future stop if it's near 240th, as I speculate. So that's just one example. Should the code also provide provisions for projects beyond the half-mile buffer, again, potentially justified through a parking study to take advantage of some parking reductions. The other application that we heard from tonight was for the development on the old Seattle Times site, which again is just outside the half-mile buffer from the Beardsley 195th stop, which was the closest one that my initial analysis met the requirements for frequent transit. But I will look closer into that stop by Home Depot that Commissioner Curd mentioned, and refine this map as we go forward. But in both cases, some provisions that would allow that extension, and these are both big developments that would probably be doing a parking study anyway, and certainly that wouldn't be a significant cost in the overall cost of those projects. I think the concern is more for the smaller scale projects to be required to do parking studies. So, and then this is the last issue, and this is one that I had in the slideshow, but wasn't in the memo for the November 17th meeting. But this is just an example of a kind of an interesting project, a single family house in Lower Maywood. This will be on the tour. I'm quite sure. And that's right in between a 5-plex and a 3-plex. And as you can see, there's other multiplexes around there. And it's zoned multifamily, but the lot is small enough that those regulations would only allow 2 units. Now, each of those units, in theory, could do an accessory unit, so you could have 4 units. But right now, our accessory parking, that would mean 4 parking spaces for each of those 2 units, a total of 8. So, and this is definitely within, is near frequent transit down on 185th. It's just a block away from 185th. So should these codes amendments also address situations like this, single family developments with ADUs near frequent transit? If we are allowing up to 4 plexes in single family zones that are within that radius, should there be some consideration for reductions there? And in these cases, how would we address affordable housing? Would we just do like we do with ADUs and assume that those will tend to be more affordable units, or is there a reasonable way to apply some affordable housing requirements? And also, this kind of slipping over into the missing middle, if we're going to allow up to a 4-plex in single family zones, should we also consider allowing them in our multifamily zones with lots that are currently too small based on our requirements? So that's the end of my discussion. As I said last time, we're trying to keep these as simple as possible, but this is a topic that quickly does get complex. So I'm happy to, I'll stop sharing. I can go back if there are any need to look at these images as part of the discussion. And I just did want to say that we could possibly continue this discussion on January 19th, although that meeting is when we're bringing back missing middle. And so it's already possibly a little bit on the full side. I hate to wait, skip a whole month before coming back to you, but the next date would be February 2nd. So it's possible we could do just a quick update or answer some questions that get raised tonight, and then have a more complete discussion on February 2nd. I'm going to stop sharing and open it up.
So Commissioner Dodd, so your hand is up.
Thank you. I wanted to get something quick in before Commissioner Westerbeck. So I was just going to say for the last two slides with questions about whether we should allow more, I'm losing it. Anyway, yes and yes were my answers to those questions. I won't summarize because we just saw them, but thank you.
So Dave, you made reference to a process in Canyon Park whereby an exception could be granted. Remind me again what that was?
We call them departures. And basically what it said was, here's the regulation. And if you meet, and this, they weren't, only certain code provisions were allowed departures. But they said that you could deviate from the requirement if you met certain criteria. So that would be another way to look at this rather than just requiring a parking study. Maybe there are other, although the obvious criteria would be to provide a parking study. But the other thing, I have done a little more research. I haven't gotten actual figures on what a typical parking study would cost. But one thought is, and I think this is in the memo, is that if the criteria for the parking studies, if we can come up with some pretty simple criteria and to the degree we can use the King County right size parking calculator, I think that our staff could review parking studies based on that calculator, and the parking study that the applicant for the North Creek project submitted was done by a parking consultant, but they used the King County right size parking calculator. So it may not be as onerous, or I think we could make it a fairly simple requirement, both for the applicant to submit and for staff to review.
Thank you. So commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Westerbeck.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. I want to hit a few things. I really think our current parking for the entire city should be just kind of re-envisioned. And it seems like we're doing this thing, like multifamily tax exemption is a great idea. I think we should lean on things like that and probably stop using like affordable housing as a sort of punitive bargaining chip. I keep seeing projects as someone in architecture and reading about others where we could build a lot more affordable housing units immediately, and the site could take more affordable housing units if we weren't held back by parking. And I think in a few of those projects, because there's a lot of affordable housing developers who want to build affordable housing, there's not a shortage right now. There's always going to be a shortage of housing. Don't let me say that that's not true. But you let a few of those happen, say it's 30, 40 units more because they couldn't get the parking before. They could only do 40 and now they can do 80 or 100. 3 or 4 of those, and you've got more units than you would have by punitive approach over a few years of saying you have to do 20% affordable and forcing it. It's one of those just kind of release and let it happen. People want to build this. And again, I'll come back to like a broken record. Developers doing development, they know what they need to do. The lenders, first of all, aren't going to usually let them build without the parking they think is necessary to secure the investment, make sure it's a quality investment for them to build that building. And people should be allowed to build without parking if they want. If they want to take that risk and say, I'm only going to try and attract people who don't want to have cars, they want to have bikes only or something like that, they should be able to do that. I don't know why we would hold them back. If they want to take that risk and they don't want to invite cars to that part of town, that's another thing. Parking invites driving. Driving is creating climate change. We should, as a city, as a policy, I've even heard council say, why are we encouraging things that are burning up the climate? We got to stop doing that. Well, this is one of the first things we need to do to stop encouraging cars. We're attracting cars. It's Donald Shoup, the parking guru, says parking is a car fertility drug. So we should really just be discouraging attracting cars to downtown Bothell in general and trying to shift away from it. The great cities of the world, including Toronto today, very, very much, this actual today happened, Toronto, Canada, eliminated parking minimums from their city code today. So we should be doing the same thing. We're going to think in 10, 20 years, why didn't we do this a lot sooner? It's going to happen, whether it's this council or the next one. It's just not a good idea as a bargaining chip. These reductions also are kind of small. I mentioned in the last meeting, we go down from like 1 to 0.75. If we're going to do an incremental approach, it should be jumping down to 0.75 or 1 down to 0.3, like we do for the low income and very low income in our current code. That would actually make a real movement, and actually might get some developers building more affordable housing. And I also think, for example, we could rethink the code in a way and say, all right, if you're willing to build an apartment building that is 50% plus or 60% plus low income units, then parking's optional. Just build units. We need housing. And if you don't want to build it, that's okay. But if it's going to be market rate, then okay, maybe we have some minimums or something. But if you're willing to build affordable, which we desperately need, you build a certain percentage, like more than 10 or 20%, 50, 60 plus. It's optional, just let them build it. And last but not least, we're going with that we sort of lionize cars. Like it's all centered, our home building is centered around cars first. And as an architect, we all know every building starts with a parking study. How many cars can you park? And then you decide how many people you can house. We should be thinking, we should center building homes for people first. And then the cars are kind of secondary. And that's the last thing I want to say right now. I'm probably thinking more things, but those are just the kind of notes that I came up with as we were talking. And that's why they don't speak to specific slides, but kind of a rethinking of our entire parking paradigm in Bothell. So, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Westerbeck. Other commissioners? Commissioner Robson.
Thank you. I really like Commissioner Westerbeck's suggestions. I just worry about public backlash. We are already, we're here representing the community. And as much as I personally want to burn all parking lots and drive them into space, there's public outrage over not being able to find street parking, or not even that people are parking on their street. It's not an issue of them not being able to find parking. And I know that our communities need cars. Right now they do. They might not in 50 years or 10 years, but they do right now. And I think that as representatives of our communities who are, very focused on parking, who are dependent on their cars, I think that as much as I would love to be like, oh, it's optional, let's not base it around cars, I think there needs to be a balance. I like this idea of rethinking it and not putting cars in the center, but rather as an afterthought. I think we can do that. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Dodd.
Thank Thank you. Commissioner Robson brought up something that I think about a lot as I try to reduce my own car trips. And the biggest thing that impacts me, I have the bike. I can stick my young child on the back of it. We go a lot of places, but at busy times of day, the lack of protected bike lanes gets me, and I'm just not going to take my kid around Bothell very far without protected bike lanes. Our bike plan needs to beef up. We need some road diets that actually protect everybody on bikes before I can really do everything around Bothell on a bike. I will run my like where I'm going to bike plan by my friends. And sometimes they're like, nope, don't go that way. That's a bad idea. So it's really important. And I see studies coming out that say that painting lines on a shoulder to make a bike lane doesn't actually reduce, deaths, but protected bike lanes do. And I know we're not talking about the bike plan right now, but in conjunction with parking management and reducing parking minimums, I think making sure that people who need to get from, I don't know, Canyon Park, where Amanda lives, to downtown Bothell for a planning commission meeting, just as an example that I came up with off the top of my head. We have, protected bike lanes and a safe route to get there. So that's what I would really like to see. Or even for me to get to the Burke Gilman or the Sandwich River Trail, I cut through Kenmore to go to Redmond, which is silly, but that's the safest route I found. So just wanted to kind of add that in addition to getting people less car dependent means we also need to give them other avenues like safer walking trails and safer bike options. So thank you.
Other comments? Commissioner Curd.
Thank you. And thank you, Dave, for the presentation. Lots of good thoughts from fellow commissioners. I would just offer my 30 seconds of nihilism in that it doesn't really matter what we do because parking is going to be built anyway. It's a requirement of loans. It's a requirement for people to have construction on site. Like it's a requirement of today, just to Commissioner Robson's point. So it doesn't really matter what we do because it's going to be built anyway. And if we take a more progressive approach in reducing it, we're going to be on the forefront of what the most reduced is physically and feasibly possible, while still maintaining what is economically viable for projects to continue. With that, I will stop being nihilist and we can continue to have discussion.
Commissioner Alders.
Jenny Alders here. Thank you for the conversation. I'm not trying to add to your nihilism, Commissioner Curd. I really am not. But what do you say to people, or what is the response, I guess, when a person moves into a new place and they don't look at the parking situation? Because we have such a hot market right now, even in the rental market, people take what they can get and then they figure out the car later. And I actually see that's where a lot of the conflict around parking comes from, is that they ended up in a spot, and because if that unit wasn't built for parking and they want to get a car, then you get a lot of conflict among the neighbors typically. So that's just a scenario that I've seen, I think, play out. And just thinking, for the community, what is the response to that situation? Like, I totally get wanting to say, let developers build where they expect that people aren't going to have cars. And then people move in who expect that they will have cars, even though the developer was like, we're not having cars here. And that kind of mismatch. So just, I'm open to learning and understanding this better.
Commissioner Dodd.
It's me again. Sorry. Commissioner Alders brought up a good point, and I guess just living in some of those situations in the past, if it's too difficult to own a car, you won't. My spouse and I shared a car for 7 years because we had first an apartment and then a condo with one parking spot, and I just made my commute work. It was also cheaper to take an Uber here and there than to own a full-on second car for most of that. And then when we moved to the house that that I live in now, we had room for 2 cars, so we got another car. We eventually went back down to 1 because we realized we didn't really need it, but we were like, haha, now we can both drive somewhere at the same time. And there was kind of that sort of like stretching out. So I think making it just not super easy for every driver to have a car makes people think like, do I need this car? Can I do something else? So I think rather than tension amongst the neighbors, I think it's just making people think like, do I really need to do this? Like, how many times per month do we actually need this many cars for our house? So that's something to keep in mind. And then I know a lot of people who are very car dependent who won't rent a place if they don't have guaranteed parking. So that kind of helps that place stay more affordable, and they'll go pay more to live somewhere else with a garage. So something to think about.
Okay. Commissioner Curd.
As long as we're offering anecdotes. Quick one here. So I live in a historic fourplex, and the parking here is officially good, but it's not really. The parking spots are really narrow. And I got in a rear-ended on 228 a couple of months ago, 6 months ago, and I bought a new truck because I need one for work. And turns out it's really difficult to park my new truck in this really narrow parking spot. And so I find myself in this issue too, is that the location that I'm in isn't, there's some conflict with what my needs are, right? Well, it's a behavior change. And I've learned instead to park my truck at work during the week, and I take my bike to work. And then on the weekends when my neighbors aren't parking and being in the narrow spots, then I park it at my house. And so it's a behavior change, and it's something that I can learn. And it's something that I think people are resilient, and it's a personal choice of economics, whether you live or you rent here, and you understand that you figure out that your conditions are changing, that you need more parking or less parking, and you find a place that works for you. So I just thought I'd offer that too.
So I have kind of 2 areas, I guess, to talk about or comment on. One is sort of echoing Commissioner Dodd on making other means of transportation more viable if we're reducing parking. And in particular, as well as bike lanes, I think we need to look at sidewalks. And where we are reducing, within a half mile or a quarter mile of transit, we ought to be sure that there's connectivity of the sidewalks. And one of the corridors that's on the little map is 15th off of 228th. And that's a checkerboard of sidewalks that go either side of the road back and forth. And sure, there's probably a continuous, sidewalk somewhere, but you got to make multiple crossings, generally without crosswalks. So I think we need to look at that kind of prioritizing those sidewalks and bike lanes in areas where reducing parking and looking to get people to transit. Other area is parking enforcement, which we've gone round and round on. But I think when we talk about parking, there are really 2 distinct types of parkings, particularly downtown. There are the residents who have one set of parking needs, and then there are the more transient users, people who are coming downtown to the businesses who have different needs. And I don't think we've distinguished between them. And without enforcement, my opinion, I guess, is that the residents end up taking spaces that make it more difficult for the transients. And when you look at what's going on there's an awful lot of people parking in public spaces that I think are long-term. Look at the Bothell park and ride now, and they're not parking near the bus. They're parking on the other side. So those aren't, people using the transit. There are some other examples. So I know enforcement is challenging. Giving people tickets is not popular. It's not a way to gain votes. But I think if we are reducing parking, that has to be a part of it. So my thoughts. Other thoughts on parking reductions? So Dave, did you get useful feedback or just hear more venting?
A little of both, but no, there was useful feedback, and the bottom line question, I guess, one of the main questions I have that we, and the reason we came back with the background on our approach to affordable housing is that after the discussion last time, there seemed to be some, certainly some reluctance to requiring affordable housing as a result of increasing capacity through parking reductions. And that was the core reason for this, was to at least take a look at the expanding the radius for market rate parking reductions from 1/4 to 1/2 mile, with some analysis of affordable housing provisions to go along with those. And I think there's some differences of opinion on that, but personally, I think that given the direction that we got from council, that we need to at least do some analysis of what that might be and bring that back to you for consideration. And also just to be, I think it's good to be as consistent with our past approaches as we can. So that's what I would propose, is that we come back with, based on what we've heard, and I wouldn't disagree that that the city needs to take a more global look at our parking requirements, but that's not what this item was set up for. So I think we have an opportunity here to take another step towards that goal, and along with that, an opportunity to increase opportunities for affordable housing. So I'd like to at least come back to you with that, and then start getting into the nitty-gritty of exactly how this would look in terms of potential code amendments. And Mike Stanger had his hand up, took it down, but I don't know if I covered what you were going to say, Mike.
You did. Yeah, I don't have anything to add at this time. I would withdraw my point.
And Director Cotterman, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just Dave actually said several things that I was going to say too, but I wanted to piggyback on that a little bit. So getting back to some comments that Commissioner Westerbeck made regarding affordable housing and not mandating it, that's certainly a direction that the council may decide to go. But as Dave alluded to, the policy direction that we have from the council right now is take advantage of every opportunity that we can to mandate additional affordable housing. So that's the policy we're operating under. Certainly the commission can make a recommendation to the council that is contrary to that, or suggesting a different direction on that. That's within your purview and your prerogative. But just so you know, that's where the staff is right now, because that's the direction we've had from the council. And we would still be recommending that that's what we do going forward. So we often don't have a different recommendation from the Planning Commission. I really hesitate to do that, but sometimes we do that, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. So just want to let the commission know that that is an option that you have. Likewise with parking, if you want to recommend going beyond, the current discussion, and not necessarily holistically, as Dave said, that's not really what this is set up for. But at least in this instance, if you want to open the door to that possibility, that could be part of your recommendation as well. So those are both within your purview and your prerogative to do that. And then just as a little bit of an aside, I was encouraged to hear the anecdotal stories from Commissioners Curd and Dodd. So that tells me that commissioners can be trained. And I think that's important to keep in mind.
Commissioner Dodd.
Thanks. I just had a question for Director Cotterman based on what you just said. So in January, we're getting 3 completely new council members as a result of our recent elections. Is that sort of direction something that you'll be clarifying with the new council, as it were, when they go in, just to make sure that that's still kind of the direction they want to go?
That's a great question. It's not something that we're not planning to revisit the housing strategy per se, but when we bring something to them, we can certainly raise that, excuse me, especially if the commission raises that as a question for them as part of your recommendation. We can say, this is the previous direction we've always had from the council. This is what we're operating under. If the council wishes to change that policy in that direction, then they can certainly do that at any time.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So, Commissioner Gustafson.
Muted. Still muted.
Thank you. My buttons went away temporarily. So thank you, Michael Cotterman and Dave Boyd, for presenting a really interesting question, which is how far do we want to push this discussion to the council? And next year with the new council, I would suggest pushing this discussion as far as we can, at least for the sake of argument. I trust the council will consider all sides of the debate. It is a voice that needs to be heard. And I think the council appointed all of us, so they knew what to expect. They knew that we might present some more radical proposals. And I think they're kind of counting on us to push the boundaries of discussion. And I would like to see those boundaries pushed to the extent that we can. Thank you.
And regarding the director's comments, first of all, I too don't see a problem with the commission recommending one thing and something else happening. Kind of echoing on Commissioner Gustafson's comment, I think we're a voice. We're voicing an opinion. It's important to get that opinion out there, and if other decisions are made, we can certainly see that. But I want to clarify perhaps a little bit, Director Cotterman. I think the commission has, from what I've heard in the past year, the commission has a couple of really strong interests. There's a very strong interest in affordable housing. There's also a very strong interest in reducing dependence on cars and parking and all that. And I wouldn't want to characterize them as being in conflict, but rather sometimes there seems to be an opportunity to get farther with one than the other. So, but they're both interests that I've heard pretty consistently. Just sometimes it's louder on one than the other. That's my interpretation of what I've heard. And Commissioner Aldrich, and then Senior Planner Boyd, I see you as well.
Thank you, Chair. Jenny Aldrich here. And so in a discussion about pushing the boundaries, one of the strategies that I find effective in figuring out what options are available while you're pushing boundaries is to look at just a sample of what are more like the words that we were using at our last meeting was, what are some of the least restrictive parking policies that exist, not necessarily in our area. And I do appreciate that the presentation tonight did look at some of the policies that are in our area. But if we're going to be looking at Toronto, if we're going to be looking at some of the, I'm just going to call out Walla Walla for some of their policies that they've adopted. It might be useful to take a less regional approach and a more just data, what's some data about this topic that we've seen implemented elsewhere, so that we could then analyze and critique the strategies that we've seen that are more in line with this kind of radical approach, as Commissioner Gustafson called it, that we might be able to choose from or tinker with. If when replicating, when trying to innovate, and I believe that one of the values of our city is to innovate in service of our community. It is useful to find out what is being done elsewhere instead of trying to reinvent the wheel. So if we can get some, it might be helpful for us to get some direction on how to choose. And I realize I'm leaving, so whatever you guys get, have fun. But it might be useful just for this to come back to the Planning Commission with some here's the most radical option we can find. Here's a slightly more conservative approach, and then and just give us a spectrum to perhaps choose from. Those are just some suggestions that I might have of a way to kind of cut through the impasse that I see that we're experiencing here. So thank you.
I'd like to pause for a moment and recognize the time. I see Senior Planner Boyd. I know we close to wrapping this up, but not quite completely done. I think we also have at least one item of unfinished business to discuss, and then closing. So I'd ask if there's a motion to extend the meeting for perhaps 10 minutes. Commissioner Dodd, I saw your hand first.
I move to extend the meeting by 10 minutes to 9:10.
Okay, is there a second? Commissioner Gustafson, I saw you first. Moved and seconded to extend the meeting for 10 minutes until 9:10. All in favor? Let's see. I'm just going to note that I see Commissioner Gustafson. Yes. I see all commissioners indicating visually yes. So we'll extend the meeting till 9:10 and hope to be able to wrap within that time. So then I'll go back to the item we were discussing, the expanded parking reductions, and Senior Planner Boyd had his hand up.
I just wanted to point out that your recommendations to council can, of course, include your recommendations for the specific code amendments within this item, but it can also include recommendations, and Planning Commission has done this in the past, for additional items that you think should be addressed, like citywide parking requirements and pedestrian and bike infrastructure to support these reductions. So my direction would be, or at least my inclination for what to bring to you is to try to craft some amendments based on the feedback you have, but also to suggest some findings that you might put in there to accompany those to further the discussion.
Yes, we have used that tool before, and I was preparing myself mentally for some that I would suggest. So we'll look forward to your suggestions. Any other comments on this item then, expanded parking reductions? Seeing none, thank you, Senior Planner Boyd, for a very stimulating topic, always guaranteed to generate conversation among the commissioners. We'll look forward to hearing it again on whichever agenda you believe, you and the director believe it best fits in the near future. So with that, I'll move on to unfinished business. I believe we have some unfinished business regarding capital facilities at least?
Well, I guess we did introduce that last time. So I did circulate more detailed information about the capital facilities, and then we learned that the council is scheduled to make its appointment on January 4th. So there could be more than one planning commissioner that volunteers, and leave it up to council to pick, or you could also decide among yourselves if there is a candidate to put forward.
So
Commissioner Gustafson has expressed an interest. I don't know if that's information that everyone had.
Okay. Commissioner Dodd, do you have a comment?
I'm also interested in participating in that process. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Curd.
I will also express interest, but I'm not going to have hurt feelings if they don't choose me.
All right.
We'll be sure to note that in the thing, what we pass along to council.
I have a bit of a suspicion you may have a majority of the commission interested, but I too am interested, but I will not throw my name in the ring just in the interest of letting some others participate. I think I was in the last round. I'm not, my memory serves. So we have 2 commissioners who have expressed a strong interest and another who has expressed a interest.
I'll say availability and willingness.
Availability and willingness.
We won't speak in degrees. We'll mention all 3 names when we.
Okay, so there are 3
forward those on.
interested, and let them select. And I trust you will, whoever or however many of you are participating will come back to us with reports on progress, because again, there is a lot of interest on the commission on this matter. So do you have what you need on that then?
I think so.
Okay. Other unfinished business?
The walking tour.
Yes.
The director, the chair, and I had a discussion yesterday. Saturday is not looking like a lovely day for a walking tour. But the last I checked, it says it is actually the warmest day in the next week, but
that being a relative relative term as well. It looks like more of a sloshing tour.
It's a 93%, but it does say periods of rain. So anyway, what we discussed, since these forecasts generally change quickly and aren't very reliable more than a couple days out, or if that, was that unless the commission just wants to postpone at this point, we thought we would make a call Friday noon and in time to send out email and notify people by social media, and then still there would be a need for somebody to show up at 1 o'clock Saturday in case anybody didn't get the word about the cancellation. So that was what we had discussed, but other ideas or?
I would also mention that we have at least one council member who's indicated, Deputy Mayor Zorn's indicated she's planning on attending. And one of the incoming council members, Councilmember-elect Mankey, has indicated he would like to be there. He's got a conflict. He's trying to see if he can make it. So those are the only 2 that I've heard from. And are you raising your hand because you're going to be there? Okay. So we have Commissioner and Council Member-elect Alderts will be there. I was assuming all the commissioners were coming since we had confirmed the date and time with all of you. So, but we'll count you twice since you'll be there in both roles. And then also from Kenmore, we have indications from the city manager that a couple of council members and or commissioners are planning to attend as well. So and I bring that up because obviously the more notice we can give folks, the better, because we don't want them to have to come downtown in the rain, cold and rain if we're not going to be able to do the tour.
Commissioner Westerbeck?
I think Director Conran said it already. I chat with Rob Garlindsey of Kenmore and told him a while back, and he coordinated with Aaron because he was excited about the walk. So I think he said he's got 2 of their commissioners coming. And I would also mention that future council member-elect Alderks and council member-elect Alcabra were on the first walk we did in fall or late summer. So some people have been on the walk already, so that's great. Just want to mention that.
So I guess the punchline is we want Commissioner Curd.
I don't want to steal the punchline.
No, go right ahead.
I think I am still really excited about it, and I think a little bit of rain does not melt our spirits. So I think that we all have raincoats, probably. If not, I can bring some umbrellas for people and some hand warmers, and I think we can still get it done.
Commissioner Alders?
I'm going to echo Commissioner Curd. As the parent of Forest Schoolers, the only time that the weather is not tolerable is if you haven't prepared and dressed properly for it. So please come dress warmly and let's have an adventure.
Yes, no bad weather, just bad clothing. But again, I think the punchline is there is a strong interest in moving forward, but a recognition that there may be some very bad weather. So I think light rain, intermittent drizzle, we're not afraid of getting wet. We take the sense of the commission that there's a very strong interest in moving forward. So when we talk on Friday, we'll certainly keep that in mind and not postpone lightly just because it's a little wet. Okay.
All right. Also let you know that we've secured a megaphone for use during the tour, so everyone will be able to hear, hopefully. And also we're preparing some laminated versions of the map in anticipation of wet weather.
All right. Any other unfinished business? Seeing none, reports from staff beyond what we pulled into unfinished business.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I have a long list this evening. I came a little better prepared for a change.
Will we need to extend to get your list in?
Probably not a bad idea.
Okay, so I'll ask if there's a motion to extend. Do you think 5 minutes, Director Cotterman?
I believe so, unless there are a lot of questions, and I don't know if there are any commissioner reports.
And we can always extend again. So is there a motion to extend 5 minutes? Commissioner Dodd?
Move to extend the meeting by 5 minutes to 9:15.
Is there a second? Commissioner Westerbeck?
I second to extend the meeting 5 minutes.
Okay, all in favor? All right, I see all the commissioners indicating visually to extend. So the meeting is extended to 9:15. Director Cotterman, please proceed.
Thank you. So Dave already mentioned on the 19th, we have a pretty full agenda. We have 3 items on that agenda so far. So I'm anticipating it will maybe a little longer meeting than usual, just to warn you all ahead of time. So we've got the follow-up on the docket, and we do need to do it that night because we're already scheduled for the council on February 8th. We have the housekeeping amendments public hearing that we're about to advertise. So that will be going forward on the 19th. And then we do now have a contract on the missing middle housing code amendment work. So the consultants are on board. Dave's getting that kicked off. And I think we're going to have some discussion with the commission that evening on that topic as well. So just to let you know, plan on a little longer evening. Bring snacks if necessary. Also, we have a vacancy coming up. As we know, Commissioner Alders will be resigning from the commission so that she can take her seat on the council starting January 1st. So they'll be advertising, the city clerk will be advertising for vacancies on all boards and commissions beginning the first of the year. Those will be filled by the council probably in, appointments will be made usually in February or early March, and then they take their seats the first meeting in April. 2 of the commissioners are also, their terms are expiring in 22. That's Chair Kiernan and Commissioner Dodd. Commissioner Dodd was appointed to fill a partial term. So in anticipation and hope that you're both interested in continuing, you will need to submit applications to the clerk when that process starts. And since you may have a friend on the council, I'm hoping that they'll be persuaded to reappoint you both to the commission. No lobbying there whatsoever. In-person meetings. So the council did talk about this at their last meeting and decided not to start in-person meetings yet. Those will be hybrid meetings once those do start. And my plan is to start the commission about a month after the council goes back to in-person meetings. So we'll get some of the bugs worked out as far as hybrid meetings. So just so you're aware, we're not doing anything right now, but once the council does that, then we'll probably follow about a month afterwards. So you can be anticipating that. And along those same lines, City Hall will be reopening to the public 3 days a week, starting on January 4th, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And we will have staff, a little more than skeleton staff. We won't have everybody back in the building, but we will have staff there for the permit counter, customer service counter, as well as any backups. And of course, the rest of the staff will still be working remotely and providing all the same full services that we have been for going on 2 years now. So this is our opportunity to make ourselves available once again to the public in person. There will be masks required in the building, and we will require that of people coming into the building as far as the public visiting as well. Don't anticipate there'll be a mad dash or a large rush of folks right away, but we certainly want to make that available to people that may not have convenient ways to do city business otherwise. So we're kind of looking forward to that and establishing the new normal and figuring out what that is going forward. So just wanted to let you know about that as well. I think that was everything on my list. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Gustafson.
Thank you, Director, for the updates and information. My question is, the city has established a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Do you know if that process to apply and the deadlines are the same as all the other commissions, or is that something different? How would people learn about it, in other words?
That's a great question. Thank you. I'm going to have to look into that. I don't recall offhand if that's, I think they've gone through a separate process for that, but I'm not positive. So let me look into that. I'll find out some more and let you know about that. I should also mention, thanks for reminding me though, we do have an advisory committee that's being established. This is for the telling the full story, Bothell's history, and including history of indigenous peoples as well as people of color. Because right now our history is pretty much the white history of Bothell. So there'll be an advisory committee that'll be working with our historic preservation consultant and our landmark preservation board on that project. And that we've been taking nominations, self-nominations for a couple of months now. And I think we're close to being able to appoint those and get that committee established.
There is a diversity committee page on our webpage, along with Planning Commission, the other boards and commissions, and they're taking applications until this January 10th, according to that.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
All right, just a very short time left. Any quick reports from members? Commissioner Alderks.
I will just officially say thank you and goodbye. It has been a joy to work with all of you. I'm just really grateful for this opportunity. And yes, let's adjourn. Can I motion?
Sure. This is there is a motion to adjourn. I'll just take a moment of privilege. This is the last meeting of the year. I do want to thank you all through this challenging Zoom process. And you can't tell, but I've got my holiday tie to recognize. It didn't show, but I got to get it out once in a while. So I hope you all have a very safe and happy holiday season, a very good new year, and hopefully next year we will meet together in person and see each other. So then I think there's a motion to adjourn on the table. Is it seconded? Moved and seconded. So if there is no discussion, I will adjourn the meeting, the December 15th meeting of the Bothell Planning Commission at 9:15 this night, tonight. Good to see you all. Hope to see you around town.
And on behalf of all the staff, thank you and happy holidays to everyone as well. Thanks so much. Great year.
Thank you.
And to all of you.
Here's
Great break, everyone. Happy New Year.
Bye all.
Happy holidays.